I was born in Watertown, South Dakota. My parents, Ron and Corinne Arnold, had a bit of a scare when I was born because the umbilical cord was wrapped around my neck and I wasn't breathing. Obviously, they got it all worked out because here I am. When I was younger, Mom used to call me her little miracle. Much later, my family joked that the only reason I got into politics was because that cord around my neck had cut off the flow of oxygen to my brain. Nobody in our house was allowed to take themselves too seriously. But there was also a lot of love. We lived in a modest but comfortable house. Our social life revolved around mostly church at the Family Worship Center in Watertown and the community and schools in Hamlin County, named for President Lincoln's vice president. My parents both grew up in South Dakota. On their first date, Dad took Mom to a Lowell Lundstrom revival on a Wednesday night. They got married and settled on the same land where Dad's parents lived and where Dad had learned to farm. We raised cattle and grew corn, soybeans, wheat, and alfalfa. Dad rotated barley or flax when the market seemed good. We had horses, of course, and also raised buffalo for a time, as well as a random assortment of 4-H sheep and the occasional goat. Farming, hunting, and riding horses was pretty much in our blood, like it is for a lot of families, especially out here in the Midwest. While I grew up on a ranch, my childhood was probably not all that different from the way kids all over America grow up in terms of school, church, sports, hunting, rodeo, and family. But from the time I was a little girl, I felt kind of out of place, like I didn't belong. I was uncomfortable with who I was and always very aware of my shortcomings. I guess, like a lot of children, I lacked confidence when I was young. Most people are surprised to find out I am an introvert. I mean, look at my day-to-day life now. I spend all my time talking with people, giving speeches, attending events, doing media interviews, all activities that involve being very outward-focused, always being ready, being on, performing, and giving a good impression. Hopefully. But that does not come naturally for me. In fact, I find it pretty exhausting. Don't get me wrong, I love people and I love what I do. But if I need a day that fixes me, if I need to recharge, my natural inclination is to go sit in a tree stand and hunt deer, or spend time outside in some activity that involves animals and nature. Being alone is something I can find joy in. Being quiet is a gift. As the third of 4 children in a busy house on a working farm in northeastern South Dakota, there were quiet days, but no boring days. We were always working, it seemed. Growing up, I always thought that my mom and dad had had 4 children because they needed more hired hands to work on the farm and ranch. That's a joke. Kind of. I was a tomboy, and I loved growing up on a farm. I loved animals and quickly adopted any kind of animal I could lay my hands on, in addition to the livestock that was part of our farming operation. At some point, I became known as the kid that would take in any random pet or abandoned animal. Most often, these were raccoons. One of my very favorite pets was Bandy, a raccoon I raised from just a few days old that was part of our family for more than 10 years. I also had parakeets. And I was not terribly creative at naming them. They were Nikki 1, Nikki 2, and Nikki 3. One chore that I never minded was feeding the dog and cats. I maintained a small herd of cats, usually between 20 and 30 of them, out in the barn. Dad's barn was also a good place for keeping animals we were raising for 4-H contests, and caring for any animals that had gotten hurt or were abandoned or didn't find a home somewhere else when they needed one. That is how I ended up with my first burro, a long-haired goat, a miniature horse, and a sheep. I am still amazed that my parents put up with all of it.